Hello! In this video I'm going to talk a little bit about symbolizing and do some examples in the symbolization module with negation and conditionals. And we're going to learn, we have to modify our main operator method a little bit and the removal test a little bit to make sure that it works right. This is a very important video for two reasons. One is that I'm going to do some example problems, but they're actually homework problems, so I'm going to do some homework problems. So you might want to follow along in the logic module, and then you can submit that work. And this is where things can get tricky with symbolizations, is figuring out what's the main operator. And so we want to get some practice with doing that to make sure we're not kind of getting overwhelmed by these problems. The point of this main operator method is that it helps us to move one step at a time, and so we only have to figure out one thing at a time as opposed to having to try to figure out how to symbolize the whole sentence all at once, which is far too complex. We only want to do one thing at a time, and that's easier to do. So we're going to need to find all of our logical operator words. Now, it used to be we only needed to find conditional words, but now we have both conditionals and negations. So we need to find all of those words. And then we're going to use the removal test as we were doing so before to find the main operator and the immediate pieces, and then proceed as usual. But the removal test is also going to work a little bit differently. So why does the removal test work a little bit differently? Well, remember that with a conditional, we have this test for finding the main operator. We can ask whether or not any given piece of, whether or not any if or then or only if or what have you passes the test. And what that test was is when we delete that vocabulary, do exactly two sentences remain. And we said if yes, two sentences remain, then that conditional passes the test. If no, we have more or less or ungrammatical stuff, then that conditional does not pass the test. And when only one conditional passes the test, then we know, aha, that is the main connective. And when multiple conditionals passed the test, then we needed to do other things to figure out what was the main connective. But the key thing here is we're asking, are there two sentences? With negation, we can use the deletion test, but we ask, is there only one sentence, right? When we build a sentence with a conditional, we take two sentences and put them into a conditional. When we build a sentence with negation, we take one sentence and attach a negation to it. So when we take away a negation sign, we should be left with exactly one sentence, the sentence that we attached that negation to, if that negation were the main operator. So we ask, when we are testing to see whether or not a negation is the main connective, we ask, does exactly one sentence remain? And if the answer is yes, then the negation passes the test. And if the answer is no, then the negation does not pass the test. And so that's slightly different. With the conditional, we ask, do exactly two sentences remain? With the negation, we ask, does exactly one sentence remain? The one other thing we know is how to handle not. So not, it is not the case that, but just the word not or the contractions won't or don't. Where does that negation go? And that negation on a verb always attaches just to a sentence letter and not to anything bigger. And we'll see why we need to specify that in just a second when we get into the module. So let's go ahead and do that right now. We're going to do three problems. We're going to start with problem 2.6 LRS 43. If there aren't going to be backseat drivers, I will drive. So the first thing we want to do is look for all of our operator words. So we have this if. That's going to become an operator, and we have this aren't, or the are, and then the nt, so are not, right? So let's see, now we want to use our removal test, and we want to test, okay, when we delete, what are we left with? So if we delete this if, then we have two sentences. There aren't going to be backseat drivers, and then I will drive. And so the if passes the removal test, and so the if could be the main connective. What about the nt? We could delete that. And how many sentences are we left with? Well, we're supposed to be left with one, and that's what we're left with. We're left with, if there are going to be backseat drivers, I will drive. And so it might look like, oh, this nt actually does pass the removal test, right? We take it away, and we're left with the right number of sentences. We're left with one sentence. So we want to know, well, is the if the main connective, or is the nt the main connective? And the answer is the if is the main connective, because while when we take this away, we're left with exactly one sentence, a conditional sentence, which has two sentences as pieces, but it itself is one sentence, that conditional. This nt or not always has to attached to a sentence letter. So when we have an nt like this, it's only the main connective when the only thing we would have when it attaches to a sentence letter. And that's not what would happen if we tried to take this out first. It would attach to a conditional. So we know this is a conditional. The if is the main connective, so it's a conditional. And the antecedent is whatever comes after the if, in this case up to the comma. So we put there aren't going to be backseat drivers there. I will drive goes in the consequent. So we've brought down everything but the if, which is turned into the arrow. I will drive is atomic symbolized by W. There aren't going to be backseat drivers. That's a negation of there. Oops. Oh, no. Let's try that again. There are going to be backseat drivers. There are going to be backseat drivers. That's X. So if not X, then W. So if not backseat drivers, then I will drive. Should be right, and it is. Let's head to our next symbolization, which is 2.6 LRS 162. Oops, that didn't work. 2.6 LRS 162. So you can pause this if you need to take your time to get there. It's not the case that if I am too tired to drive, I will drive. We want to use our tree removal test. So the first thing we do is we find all the logical vocabulary. So we've got this if, and then we have the it's not the case that. So those are our logical operator words. There are no negations on verbs. So that's it. If and it is not the case that. Let's take away the it is not the case that. We're left with if I am too tired to drive, I will drive. That's one sentence. That's exactly one sentence. That's what we need to be left with for the it is not the case that to pass the test. So it is not the case that passes the test. How about if? I am too tired to drive, I will drive. Well, yeah, there's sentence one, sentence two, but then we have this it is not the case that stuck at the beginning. And we don't slide the it is not the case that over to the I am too tired to drive. We need to not move stuff around, and so we can't move the it is not the case that. So what we're left with is one sentence, two sentence, plus gobbledygook. Well, we should be, for the if to pass the removal test, we need to be left with exactly two sentences and nothing else. So the if does not pass the removal test because we're left with too much. We have gobbledygook in addition to if. Well, it's not. This isn't gobbledygook exactly, but it's not a sentence. So we're not left with exactly two sentences. So that's what happens when we remove the if. The if does not pass the test. It is not the case that does pass the test, which means it is not the case that is the main connective, or the main operator, making this a negation. And so this has turned into that negation symbol, so we will bring down the rest of it. If I am too tired to drive, I will drive. Well, that's a conditional. The antecedent is whatever comes after the if, up to the comma, so I am too tired to drive, and that will be T. And then I will drive. What's left over is the consequent, and that is W. And so there we go. It's not the case that, so negation of if I am too tired to drive, I will drive. So negation of T arrow W looks good. Let's look at our last one, which is 2.6 LRS 163. If we right click on select, it will go immediately there. Again, you can go through the menu. It's not the case that if there aren't backseat drivers, then I will get home safely. So things are getting more complicated. So let's look for our logical vocabulary, the words that will become logical operators. So we've got this if. We have the initial it's not the case that. And then we've got this nt. Okay, so we've got three different pieces of logical vocabulary in English that are going to become operators in our logical language. That's going to be a negation, that's going to be a negation, and that's going to be an arrow. And we got to figure out which is the main connective. Well, let's do our deletion test. So let's test first this negation. When we delete it, for it to pass the test, there should be exactly one sentence left, and there is exactly one sentence left. If there aren't backseat drivers, then I will get home safely. And again, this is a complex sentence containing that and that, but this is one sentence, a conditional. If there aren't backseat drivers, then I will get home safely. And so the initial, it is not the case that passes the test. We get rid of it, we're left with the right number of sentences, exactly one. What about deleting the if? Okay, well, we're left with sentence 1, there aren't backseat drivers, and sentence, oh, we would delete the then as well. Let's delete the then. Oh, I should have capitalized that. That was a mistake. I was a little too hasty. So let's put that in. So we also delete the then, and we have two sentences. I will get home safely, and there aren't backseat drivers. But we also have this, it is not the case that floating around there by itself. So we have too much. We have two sentences plus some more, which is not what we should have for the if to pass the test. This if then does not pass the test because when we delete it, we're left with too much. So this passes the test. This does not pass the test. How about this? Well, it does pass the test, right? It is not the case that if there are backseat drivers, then I will get home safely. So deleting that, we're left with exactly one sentence, which is what we should be left with. But we remember that these negations on verbs can't be the main connective of any big sentence. The only thing the negation on a verb can attach to is a sentence letter. So while it passes the test, we don't care about it. We're going to take care of it later. So this isn't possible. We shouldn't be testing it for removal because it's negation on a verb, and so it's only going to attach to a sentence letter. This doesn't pass the removal test. This does. So this is the only logical words in the English that pass the removal test, and that means it is not the case that is the main connective, meaning this is a negation, and the rest of the sentence moves down into the text box. Okay, so now we've moved everything down in text boxes, but it is not the case that, which is turned into that right there. And it's important to make sure we don't bring this down. If we brought it down in a text box, that would be confusing. We've turned it into logic already. If there aren't backseat drivers, then I will get home safely. Well, this not is going to attach just to their backseat drivers, leaving us with just the if-then, and we do have two sentences. There aren't backseat drivers, and I will get home safely. So this is a conditional. The antecedent is whatever comes between the if and the comma. So there aren't backseat drivers is the antecedent, and I will get home safely is the consequent. I will get home safely, that's atomic S. There aren't backseat drivers. That's the negation of there are backseat drivers, leaving us with now atomic there are backseat drivers, and so that becomes X. So there we have it. One step at a time. If we don't take this one step at a time, we're liable to get confused. But if we do it one step at a time, we say, okay, there's all these logical words up here. I'm not going to try to figure it out all at once. I'm just going to test the ones that are relevant. This isn't relevant because it's going to be on a sentence later. This doesn't pass the test because when we remove it, we're left with too much, two sentences in that. But when we remove this, we're left with one sentence, meaning this is a negation. Okay, so let's bring the rest of it down. Oh, well, this is just a conditional. No problem. This is atomic. No problem. This is the negation of a sentence of this atomic sentence, and that turns into an X. So what does this saying say? Well, what does this sentence say? This says, if there aren't backseat drivers, I will get home safely. And the whole thing says, no, that's not true. The lack of backseat drivers is not sufficient for getting home safely. So that's what it says. So there we go. 3 sentences with negation and conditionals solved using our trees and main operator and removal test to break the sentence down piece by piece. And those are all homework problems, so you should submit those to get your extra credit, or not extra credit, credit. If you don't submit them, you won't get credit, and you don't want that. If you have any questions about any of these problems, please let me know. And good luck with symbolizing the rest of the symbolization problems. In the other videos in this module, the last ones, we'll look at derivations with negation and conditionals.